It's very important to dream. My rule always has been pivot the solution, never pivot the problem. You go the other way around. You say, okay, who are my users, low level? 3D artists. How many 3D artists are there in the world? 1 million. How much value can I create for each of them per year? I'm saying a random number, around 10,000. So 1 million times 10,000, I have $1 billion business. Two of my favorite books that I definitely kind of followed the first is Lean Startup by Eric Rice, and the second one is 0 to 1.
Hello everyone. Today's guest on the podcast is Konstantina Psoma. She is currently the CEO of Kaedim, a startup where they're working on converting 2D art into digital 3D models. Konstantina is driven and passionate about solving problems in the world. She has also featured in Forbes 30 Under 30.
And through this podcast, we will be exploring how she came up with the idea, identified the problem, and evaluated it. So in this conversation, we will get a chance to understand how we can evaluate an idea, how we can test it, and also the role a customer plays in this process. So let's get started. Hi, Konstantina. Thank you so much for coming on to our podcast and spending your valuable time for us. Thank you.
Of course, thank you for having me and thanks for the invite. I'm really happy to talk to you and be here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Konstantina. So, I would like to start with this question. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you go about evaluating your idea once you came up with the idea for Kaedim?
Yes, of course. I can tell you the journey and how it all happened. Before I start, I'll give you a one-liner on what Kaedim is. Kaedim was founded in 2020 and is an AI startup that generates game-ready 3D assets from 2D inputs like concept art or images. So this is what we are today. Going back probably 6 or 7 years ago, I'm originally from Greece and I was really interested in computer science and generally all the STEM subjects. I decided to study computer science. So I left from Greece when I was 17 years old to study in the United Kingdom in a city called Bristol. Computer science with innovation. I chose my degree to be kind of like computer science with innovation because I was really interested in the business side of how can you build something that actually solves a problem. So what happened during my degree was what led to me founding Kaedim, and I can give you the summary. So I started studying computer science. I was in a cohort of 200 other classmates. Most of them were playing video games in their free time. And so I got immersed in that video game culture. I got to see what consoles were, how people were playing in those huge digital 3D worlds. And on top of that, it was complete luck that my university had a game-related focus when it came to projects. So for example, for our third year of computer science, we had a big project that we had to make a game. I personally didn't take that project, but because the university had this project, they also offered a lot of complementary units for that, like 3D modeling, 3D animation, and character set design, which I took. So I took those units for which essentially taught you how to create digital 3D experiences. And I started experimenting with them. At the same time, I was very interested in the computer side of things, on the computer graphics. So I was spending my time at university doing units like computer vision, computer graphics, which just always appealed to me as kind of like an intersection of art and technology. So when I started working on the 3D modeling projects, I knew nothing about what 3D was, how 3D is made, even what software is being used for that. So completely blank slate going into. And I still remember this first project where we were called to choose a building from our city and translate it into digital 3D using a software called Maya Autodesk. So obviously this is one of the most popular software for creating 3D. And I was like, how hard can it be, really? I couldn't imagine. Like, I was like, okay, that should be easy. I'm very ambitious. I'm going to do the biggest building in the city, the cathedral. So I selected the project. I submitted to the supervisor, and I started. But I didn't start. Why? Because I thought it was easy. So I let it go along for a bit. I delayed a month or so to get started on the project. And when I thought, okay, now the deadline is approaching, we should really concentrate and do this and go through it. I opened, the 3D modeling software for the first time, Maya, and I was lost. A thousand buttons in front of me. I didn't know what I was doing. I remember the first week, I was just building one chair. One chair from the whole cathedral took me 1 week. So it was a crazy thing. The progress was moving super slow because of how steep learning curve the software was. It required a lot of processing power, so my very weak student laptop was crashing. I was losing the process. It was a nightmare. I switched to going to the university computer lab to actually use their laptops, and because they had some very powerful towers, etc. I was spending all my nights there. I finished the project with endless hours spent learning the software and trying to model everything. And it was a failure, essentially. I didn't get a good mark. I didn't like the results. I don't know what I can say. Like, it wasn't good. So I start wondering, wait a minute. Every single afternoon, I sit there and I watch people playing video games that are digital 3D worlds, and now I know they're made of digital 3D objects, digital 3D assets. So if I went through so much struggle to create one small piece of a digital 3D asset, how do people do this at scale? So how do people make huge video games that create hundreds or even thousands of assets in them? And I just had this question in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I go and talk to some local game studios in the city to try and understand how they do it at scale. And I was persuaded that they have a secret, they have an automation, and they do it like that. So I go there and say, please give me your tips and tricks. I'm just a student. I have more units coming up. Show me how you do it. And they say, okay, amazing. We're so glad you're here. Let me show you around. And they end up in a huge room. And this room was full of like 50 or 60 3D artists, all of them using the same software I was using, Autodesk Maya, modeling everything. And they were like, that's how we do it. And I'm like, how? Where is it? Where is the magic? And they say, no, there's no magic. We start from a cube, and then we build the 3D model like a sculptor would start from a cube of marble, or wood, and they will start sculpting it to achieve the final sculpture. And I was like, so it's 100% manual? And they say, yes, it's 100% manual. And I was mind blown. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that was in 2019, that in 2019, when everyone was talking about AR and VR and digital 3D experiences, every single building block of those experiences is manually created by hand. So a couple questions came up from that. I said, wait a minute, if we create everything manually, then the world must have a huge amount of digital 3D artists who do this job, but I've never met anyone who is doing that job. So I quickly did some research, like how many 3D artists are there in the world? And I figured that there's less than 1 million. Like back when I was researching first, I saw there was like 800,000 3D artists only in the whole world. And so I couldn't understand, like in my mind, it didn't make sense. How are we going to make this shift from digital 2D experiences to digital 3D experiences if we can't make digital 3D content at scale? So this is, I just described to you how the idea formulated in my mind, how I became very, very hooked and passionate about the problem. And this kind of like train of thought is what led me to devote my last year of studies on my master's thesis, which is deep learning for 2D to 3D reconstruction, which essentially was what got Kaedim born. So during this final year, having searched about the problem, having talked to people, I decided to, form the company. And it was just for fun. Like it wasn't, I didn't think anything serious about it at the beginning. I didn't know what startups were. I didn't know what tech startups were. But I was like, why not? Let's do it. And I want to give credit to the university because the innovation part of my degree had a very big focus on urging the students to think about problems in the world or gaps that are presenting opportunities for new ideas and new solutions to come in. And part of our final year was also, so we were urged to either fake a startup or do a research for the project. So I went for the first. We faked a startup. Only in our case, it actually materialized because we entered the startup competition of our university during our last year, and we won. So we won the first prize, which gave us 10,000 to get going. But I'll stop here and answer your questions because I gave you a lot amount of information about the journey and the thinking process.
Very, very interesting how you actually found a problem and then you started building on that. It kind of like goes with this phrase of necessity is the mother of all innovation. So it is interesting about this journey. But we would like to understand how you actually validated your idea, like about how did you get the confidence of, okay, I have this idea and it is viable to have a startup for this idea. Could you like elaborate a little more on this?
That's a great question. And I have been discussing this with my team lately because we are trying to grow the team and we're trying to see what kind of people are a good fit for a very, very early stage startup. And we talk about confidence. And confidence is a great word. And my thinking process, like what gave me the confidence, I would say the illusion that I can make it, or the illusion that this is important enough. And why do I say the illusion? Because it's very important to dream. And startups are something that is a very big idea, right? A tech startup is a very big idea. And you have to be able to dream and see this vision coming to life. And the very interesting point is that usually in a very early stage, when you talk about your vision and you talk about your idea, other people think you're crazy. And that's why I say the illusion you can make it, because you have to go against the stream of people thinking you are crazy in what you say, but you still believe in that. Why? Because you know something no one else does. What did I know? I knew that 3D modeling is super, super hard. Very few people have tried 3D modeling, so very few people know this truth. So the majority of people thought I was crazy. I think what gave me the confidence, it was just a dream. I just wanted to make something big. So the ambition, ambitiousness is important. And I think ambitiousness can very, very easily be found in young people that just want to make an impact, and do something worthwhile, build something of their own. But apart from that, again, the building this huge dream in your mind that you really believe in, and then just going for it. and like be like, okay, I have the world against me. I'm just gonna go through it all, and make it in the end. So we're looking for that crazy like confidence and ambition that to outsiders might look unreasonable, but to people who are visionaries and are prepared to work hard for something, it makes sense somehow. But yeah, go ahead. But you also asked about how did I come with the up with the idea, and you said what kind of feedback maybe you had from customers, and this wasn't an easy process because even if you have a problem in your mind, coming up with a solution is something that is not straightforward, and there is a lot of back and forth, and many startups pivot a lot in that process. My rule always has been pivot the solution, never pivot the problem. Like, you have to have faith in the problem, that the problem is big enough. Solution is something that you can always tailor, make changes, iterate, even pivot if needed. But keeping the problem you're solving static, for me, is really important. So in the very early days, when we were still ideating of, how we're going to solve this problem, because we had a problem in mind, we didn't have a solution. We started talking to the people who we thought are going to be our early adopters. So we started talking to game development studios, and we were asking them questions. We were observing their pipelines. We were trying to understand how would a product fit in what they already have. So, for example, we considered going from text to 3D back then in 2019. But we talked about it with them, and they said, but we have 2D teams that create all of our concept art, right? We also considered having 3D to 3D. So give us an existing 3D model and we will make variations of it. But again, we talked about this with them, and they thought it was less helpful than the third option, which was 2D to 3D. So we considered text to 3D, we considered 2D to 3D, and we considered 3D to 3D. And after talking with our potential customers, we decided that given their existing pipelines and given how their teams are structured, going from 2D to 3D is what fits perfect, the best in their workflows.
And I had another follow-up question to this. How did you validate the market potential of this idea? How did you know that, hey, if I have a startup with this idea, I can make a profitable business out of it? How did you validate this particular notion?
Yeah, so that's mainly research. So looking into how much money is currently spent in specifically for us, 3D modeling industry. How many people are working on this? What are the budgets of the companies to, for example, create games and create all of the 3D content of games? And so you make, you take your vision and you make an assumption. So let's say I take my vision and I say everyone who is creating digital 3D content starts with Kaedim, to give them a very good starting point. And once you take that vision, then you say, okay, then this means that I can capture, 50% of the current 3D modeling pipeline value. And then you evaluate whether this is a big enough opportunity for you to work on. And so investors, even at an idea stage, want to see something that has potential to become a multi-billion-dollar business. So in the calculations, you have to be clear, I'm gonna make this product. These people are gonna buy it, and there are that many of them, and each of them is gonna pay that much money. And then this is a multiplication that creates a $10+ billion outcome.
As a follow-up to that, what can you take an example or illustrate how someone trying to get these statistics can actually get the actual numbers or do the actual math for getting these numbers? What kind of research goes into this? Could you please elaborate on that as well?
Yes, of course. So I'll talk specifically for the gaming industry, because that's what I'm most familiar with. But this can be taken as an example and be applied to multiple different areas. So, for example, I was looking into what percentage of making a game is, or what percentage of the budget of making a game goes towards the 3D asset creation pipeline. And so by doing research based on the published games and the statistics that are also published at the end of, like, when people show the budget of their game, how long it took, where did each piece of the budget go. So I figured that around 60% of the budgets for a AAA game were going into the 3D asset creation pipeline. And so I then had a number of how much that pipeline was worth. So now from that, I looked into how long it takes to create the 3D, specifically from all the art pipeline, the 3D part, the 3D asset creation part. And I figured out that this is one of the most labor intensive and, as a result, expensive parts. And so let's say it accounted for like almost half of the total 3D asset creation, art creation pipeline. So then you have that for each game, let's say 30% of the budget goes into creating every single 3D object you see in the game. And this gives you an amount. So say it was a $10 million production, then this means that there was a $3 million that was devoted to that. And so then you can think about the value add that your business would create, like or the cost save, depending on the business. So if you can provide the 3 times acceleration to that, then you're saving them $2 million, and you can get back, you can say, okay, I'm going to save you $2 million, give me $500,000, and I've saved, So this is a very, very simplistic way to start making those calculations. And then you can see, okay, I have one example. From one example, I could get $1 million. How many of those companies are there in the world, and how often do they create games? And, hopefully this calculation will lead you to essentially come up with $1 billion outcome.
That was like very comprehensive analysis of how you went about it. And once you came up with this business idea, how did you go about testing your idea? And through this testing, did you go about refining your idea? Like maybe you started with some initial idea of, hey, this is how the product would look like. And after you started testing, like how did you go about refining that idea?
Sounds good. I'm going to definitely answer this question. I want to add a small part to the previous item, which I think is important. So what I just described is called a top-down method for evaluating a market opportunity potential, right? You look at the overview and then you start narrowing down until you find your niche. What I would recommend, that's how I started doing it, like in very, very early stage, idea stage. While I was working on the product and I was figuring out who are my end users, I switched to a bottom-up, essentially evaluation of the market, which essentially to calculate that, you go the other way around. You say, okay, who are my users, low level? 3D artists. How many 3D artists are there in the world? 1 million. How much value can I create for each of them per year? I'm saying a random number, around 10,000. So 1 million times 10,000, I have $1 billion business. And so this is a much more, let's say, favorable approach to investors. They want to see the bottom up, like low level approach. But having said that, going back to how did you test, how did you refine? Well, that is what takes you from an idea to having a product, really. Whatever solution you come up with first, don't be too attached to it. And with building Kaedim, one of my, two of my favorite books that I definitely kind of followed the first is Lean Startup by Eric Rice, and the second one is 0 to 1. by Peter Thiel and his students, which says that essentially you should be both of those target two very, very important concepts, which is develop hand by hand with your users. And so whatever first solution you have, very raw and very not polished, just release it. See who has the biggest problem, who has such a big problem that they're willing to use this brick solution, as they call it in Y Combinator, to turn off their fire. You know, a brick is not is not something that would help you turn off a fire easily, but still you have to find someone desperate enough to use this very bad solution to solve their pain. And this essentially is also a very, very repeating theme at the Lean Startup, which says, don't spend a lot of resources finalizing and polishing a product that you don't know people will want to use. So how I did about it is essentially we built something very, very fast that we could start testing with users, put in the hands of the users, and start getting their feedback in order to iterate it. This took us time to do. So for Kaedim, we were focusing a lot. We built the initial prototypes. We were showcasing them to people. It took us time to actually put it in the hands of the users, because it's very hard to escape this, okay, I'm going to give something shitty. You don't want to do that. We're engineers, right? We want to build something that's good, that works. So it's against our training in our kind of brain, but you have to do it. You have to overcome this fear of you being kind of looked down as not a good engineer, because if you actually spend the time to be a good engineer and make something that's good enough, you're spending resources that are probably towards the wrong direction. And then once you have something that barely works, put it in the hands of the customer and just listen to their feedback. And if you can make one change every single day that's based on customer feedback and your vision, of where you want this to go, then, and if you do it for long enough, and if you persevere for long enough, you're going to have something that people want to use, and it's valuable. So that's how we did it. We launched around 1.5 years ago, and then we were trying every single day to get people to use it and gather their feedback. And oh my God, it's very hard, but so rewarding. And I think it's just a matter of time. It's like banging your head against the wall, kind of figuring out, learning your users, understanding as much as possible about their pipelines, what are their problems, what do they need from your solution, etc., and making small tweaks every day. And at some point, things start working. People come to you.
Yeah, that is so nice about, I'd actually never thought about it this way. For some reason in my head, it was you need to give at least a decent product to your customer to get the feedback. But it is amazing how you just opened us to a new perspective about how we go about the idea. And on the same lines, can you describe a few ways of how you actually collected feedback from the customers? What kind of tools did you use? What kind of methods you use to get the feedback from the customers?
Yes, of course. And by you saying that, I get you're a very good engineer that always wants to release the optimum product to your customers. Yes, in terms of how we went about collecting feedback, we iterated a lot of things. So at the beginning, we were working with, let's say, larger companies, which didn't end up being ideal because they had a lot of other things in their minds. We had to get on a call with them to get their feedback. Maybe we had kind of a call every 2 weeks or something. It wasn't working well. As long as we changed and started approaching smaller companies that were, a couple people, they were we realized they are our early adopters because they had a huge pain, like they were very short-handed team. They needed to create content, but they had no one, or they were doing 3 jobs at the same time, like one person doing 3 jobs because they had to. It's indie. And then we also changed how we communicated. So we created a Discord server, and every single person that I was talking to, I was essentially adding to this server. And I was creating a channel for them to share with us their feedback while they were using the product. So this became very, very direct, very easy to communicate everything that was going on. And this, like by me doing it consistently, it started working slowly. So people were joining the server. I was meeting them. I was telling them about Kaedim. I would persuade them to come on board. They were joining the server. They were using it. They were giving us feedback. We were giving them updates. They were giving us feedback. We were giving them updates, etc., etc., etc. So establishing a very kind of like easy to use communication medium between you and your customers, and having direct access to them is very important. Like, it can make getting feedback and giving updates very easy.
Okay. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing those insights, Konstantina. And this kind of brings us to our last question. What would be some advice you would have to someone who is just starting about and they have an idea in their head but do not know how to evaluate to check if there is a potential for this idea or no? What would be your advice on that?
I think if you have an idea, if you figure out the problem, or if you figured out an opportunity, evaluating the size of it is the easy part. You can stay, you just do your research for weekends, talk with, 10, 20, 30 people who you think are having this problem, and see if your assumptions are correct. The message I want to give to people who have an idea is get started. Don't spend too much time researching, like maybe a weekend is enough. Go and talk to people, because this will show you whether your assumptions and whether your idea of the problem and the opportunity resonates, and there's a true problem, there is a true gap. People can feel what you're talking about. And so in my, like the parallelisms with Kaedim is, we went and talked to game studios and we asked them, like, how do you create your 3D assets? How long does it take? How much do you spend? And even if people don't say, oh my God, I have a problem, because, many people don't want to admit their weaknesses. You can understand from the answers of those questions, and by putting them into perspective with, the rest pipeline, if this is a problem they would love a solution on. So my advice to young people, or to people with ideas in general, is definitely do a basic amount of research that this is something big enough that can have a big impact, which is easy to do. As I said, couple days, do your research, talk to a couple people, and then get started. Because by starting, this is what is gonna slowly open your eyes, and you're gonna be learning more and more about your topic. You're gonna start becoming an expert. You're gonna be start talking to hundreds of people about it, and the idea will form itself. The product and the idea about the product and the idea about your idea about the problem and the solution will slowly mature the more you work on it. It's very hard to come up with a very, very mature idea before starting working on it. And it's usually what, veterans of the space can do, or like people who have spent huge amount of time building companies or working in a specific field, and they already know the problem, they already know the perfect solution. This is hard though. If you're just starting, start working on something that you're passionate enough to devote time and effort to build something that's barely working, and start talking to people about it. And this is going to give you all of the information. The more you do it, the more your idea will mature, the more valuable it will become. and the more your vision will be framed like on the journey. And that's how definitely Kaedim went and I went about it.
Thank you. And I know we said that's the last question, but how did Forbes 30 under 30 happen for you? I'm just curious about that.
It's I don't think this is I think this is how did it happen? I have no idea how it happened. I think it's it's an accumulation of effort and just putting in the work and making something people want. My other message to people is there is something very fulfilling and like worthwhile into building something new and building something of your own. And if I had one thing to say about essentially why I have achieved the little amount of things I have achieved, I don't think I have achieved a lot, is perseverance and being able to fall down, pick yourself up, and do another step. And it doesn't matter how many times you'll fall down or how many lows you'll have, as long as you can always stand up and make the next step. And this is startups, right? It's perseverance. Is like how much of a like illusion of ambition do you have in your mind to keep you going every single day, right? And obviously, how much do you believe in what you're building? If you have that, then it's just a matter of keep going, whatever like the life, like where the startup ecosystem will bring to you. And perseverance and being able to just every single day put the effort, like do your best, is accumulative what brings you to a very good place. And I know founders that have failed with a lot of like with their first startups, but they kept going and they're hugely successful. Why? Even it doesn't matter if you fail on a startup. It doesn't matter. You've learned a huge amount. Next time you'll do it better. And next time you'll do it even better. And it also is the same, like while you're working on a startup. If it's your first startup, doesn't matter if one day you will make a mistake, the next day you'll do better. And so this accumulative effort at some point grows to make you who you're going to become.
Awesome.
That's extremely motivating, and just the curiosity and enthusiasm that you have like easily rubs off on anybody listening to your story. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
Thanks a lot, Konstantina. So that was Konstantina sharing her thoughts about how to evaluate an idea and how to refine the idea based on the feedback received. And on that note, we'd like to ask you for giving us feedback so that we could improve on how we deliver this podcast. Thank you.